The story of the building of the cathedral in Mullingar is a great story, if only for the fact that it was built during the 1930s, when Ireland, in common with much of the rest of the world, was experiencing its worst economic crisis of the 20th century. Ever since its solemn consecration in 1939, the cathedral has seen many changes, not just here in Mullingar, but right across the Diocese of Meath. None more profound, I would suggest, than what it has been experiencing over the past number of years due to the COVID-19 crisis and all involved with that. First of all, we have to rewind the cathedral story back to its beginning. The year was 1900. Bishop Matthew Gaffney had just been appointed Bishop of Meath, and in his first Lenten pastor letter, he announced that he would be proceeding with the building of a new cathedral in Mullingar for the Diocese of Meath. In his letter, the bishop stated, and I quote, "We have a church that would suffice for an ordinary parish, but it is too small for the wants of this populous town and parish." The old cathedral of the Immaculate Conception stood not quite on the same site as the present cathedral, but in an area located mainly to the east of it, and its sacristy and sanctuary areas had to be cut off in order to make way for the new building. Still, the old cathedral continued to be used for worship right throughout the building of the new one, albeit with some minor reconstruction works carried out mainly to its sanctuary area. We should remember, perhaps, that the main entrance to the old cathedral was by way of what we now call the old cathedral gates. In fact, a new row of houses and gardens along what was then St. Mary's Terrace had to be purchased and then demolished in order to provide space for the building of the grand entrance to the new cathedral. Bishop Matthew Gaffney, however, moved ahead with his ideas for the building of a new cathedral back in 1900. First of all, he held a public meeting in St. Mary's Hall in the town, at which it was unanimously agreed to proceed with the building of the new cathedral. And a building fund was opened on the night, to which the bishop himself contributed £1,000. Unfortunately, Matthew Gaffney's term as Bishop of Meath was short-lived, only 6 years in fact, before he was forced to retire due to ill health. It was a Meath man from Loddonstown, Lawrence Scotland, who succeeded Bishop Gaffney, and he had little interest in the building of a cathedral, so the entire project was shelved until after his death 23 years later. It was another Meath man, Thomas Mulvaney, this time from Monalty, who succeeded Lawrence Scotland, and he was a very energetic clergyman with a distinguished academic career behind him, as well as much experience in parish work. He announced at his consecration in 1929 that he would be proceeding forthwith with the building of a new cathedral for the Diocese of Meath. And proceed he did. From the start, Bishop Mulvaney threw himself wholeheartedly into the building project. The world of the 1930s was a difficult place for everyone. Even the folk in the United States experienced real poverty following the Wall Street crash of 1929, when soup kitchens and hand-me-down shops were the order of the day. In Mullingar and across the diocese of Meath, the economic war raged throughout the 30s, with land and animals becoming almost worthless.
The ideal Ireland that we would have, the Ireland that we dreamed of, would be the home of a people who valued material wealth only as a basis for right living.
It was a difficult task for Thomas Mulvaney to attempt the building of a new cathedral in Mullingar, but persist he did, and after some deep soul-searching, he eventually selected the plans submitted by Ralph Byrne Architects of Dublin as being the plans for the new cathedral. And later on that year, he appointed Ralph Byrne himself as overall architect to the project. The contract for the building of the cathedral eventually went to Murphy Brothers of Rathmines in Dublin, but in reality it was local tradesmen from Mullingar who actually undertook the bulk of the building work. The clerk of works for the project was Dan Moore, a native of Castletown, Gagan, whose weekly reports on the building to Bishop Mulvaney and Ralph Byrne were very detailed and are still indeed retained in the diocesan archive. Much of the interior art and design work on the inside of the cathedral was carried out by the firm of William Early and Sons from Camden Street in Dublin, and their contribution to the project can never be underestimated. Prior to work commencing on the cathedral, the remains of Bishop Thomas Nulty had to be removed from the crypt of the old cathedral. And then again, in 1989, as part of the 50-year celebration, they were reinterred again, this time in the cathedral grounds. It proved impossible, however, to remove the remains of Bishop Cantwell from the crypt of the old cathedral, and his remains continue to rest under what is now the walls of the new cathedral. Work on the cathedral really began to kick into life following the turning of the first sod by Bishop Mulvaney on the 31st of March 1932, and then just over a year later the blessing of the foundation stone, again by Bishop Mulvaney. It was that same year, 1932, while Bishop Mulvaney was in Rome, that he received the assent of Pope Pius XI to the project. And it was he, the Pope, who suggested that the cathedral be dedicated to Christ the King. It should be recalled at the outset that there were three main drivers of the cathedral project right from the start. Firstly, there was Bishop Thomas Mulvaney, Bishop of Meath. Secondly, there was architect Ralph Byrne of Dublin, who always seemed to have a special draw interest for the entire project, and indeed would often go well beyond the call of duty to facilitate others. He would, for instance, very often arrange project meetings with the bishop to coincide with confirmation in parishes around Dublin and throughout County Meath. And finally, there is William Airlie and his design team, who are largely responsible for the beautiful interior of what is now the Cathedral of Christ the King. Their work on marble and mosaic are, by any standards, amazing. But there is no doubt whatsoever, but Thomas Mulvaney's fingerprints are all over this cathedral. For it was Bishop Mulvaney who had the last say on everything, after having forensically checked through every single item beforehand. And of course, he had that eternal problem of funding the entire project throughout, which eventually ran to a figure of £275,000, or what would be in today's money, €60 million. We must understand that Bishop Mulvaney came from a farming background in North Meath, Whereas a young boy, he would have attended fairs and markets regularly and would have acquired the skills around making a good bargain. It was a competency that stood to him when he was building the cathedral. The Cathedral of Christ the King is set out in the form of the ancient basilicas of old, with twin towers and a great dome, all of which have dominated the town of Mullingar ever since their completion back in 1936. The style is clearly Renaissance, based on the Roman Doric order. The cathedral and its dome are faced in chiselled granite from Bornaculla in County Dublin. The facings and the upper parts of the twin towers are built entirely of limestone from Stradbally in County Laois, Navan in County Meath and Mount Nugent in County Cavan. The structure of the building is made up of bricks from Dolphin's Barn in Dublin and steel which was imported from Glasgow at a cost of over £16,000 at the time, excluding import duties, which were set aside following a meeting between the Bishop and the Minister for Industry and Commerce at the time, Sean Lemass. Probably the most striking feature of the front of the cathedral, apart from the towers, is the tympanum over the main entrance. It stands in the pediment, measuring 42 feet by 9 feet, and the sculptor Albert Power of Dublin spent all of 1936 ensconced in a wooden box high above the ground, working on those life-sized figures in limestone. It represents Our Lady handing over a model of the old Cathedral of the Immaculate Conception to her son Christ the King. On the left is St. Peter and St. Patrick, and to the right is Pope Pius XI, the Bishop of Meath, Dr. Mulvaney, and Cardinal Joseph McRory of Armagh. Immediately above the entrance are 4 sculptured panels in limestone, and from the left they are the papal coat of arms, Abraham offering his son a sacrifice, Melchizedek offering sacrifice, and finally the coat of arms of the Meath diocese. Just above the main entrance door is a carved head of Moses, the lawgiver.